right. Welcome to Fast Break Breakfast, NBA podcast. My name is Keith Parrish. On today's episode, I have Chris Herring from Sports Illustrated. We talk about his awesome book, Blood in the Garden, A Flagrant History of the 1990s Knicks. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. I just want to let you guys know this podcast episode was recorded a while ago. It was recorded the day the league's report on Robert Sarver came out, but it was recorded before the Adam Silver press conference that followed the Board of Governors meeting and before any of the subsequent fallout. Just so you know, all of the Knicks content we talk about is unaffected. We mainly speak about the 1990s, but just letting you know the timing of when this interview was taped. Also, I'm recording this before you're hearing it, and so that's why I'm not going to talk about any current events other than, I guess, the evergreen reminder to lock in the best seats at the lowest prices with your Grizzlies season tickets. Starting at just $11 per game, you can see Ja Morant and the next gen Grizz. Plus, as an MVP member, you will receive all the next level benefits, including special events, merchandise discounts, NBA League Pass, and more. Get your 2022-2023 Grizzlies season tickets by calling 901-888-HOOP or clicking grizzlies.com. Also, if you want to play fantasy basketball with me or with John and Chuck, sign up now at patreon.com/fastbreakbreakfast. We will have regular head-to-head category leagues, and also there is the International Stackhouse of Pancakes negative fantasy league. You can play in both the head-to-head league and in the negative league. Those are open to any Patreon supporter at the $5 or higher tier. So go to patreon.com/fastbreakbreakfast. All right. Without further ado, let's bring on Chris Herring and talk about those 90s Knicks. Joined right now by Chris Herring, who wrote the incredible Blood in the Garden. Chris, excited to have you on. How you doing?
I'm good. Keith, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I read your book this summer and I loved it. And one thing I think I really enjoyed was I've been reading, I'd read Terry Pluto's Loose Balls and Terry Pluto's Tall Tales. And like, I'm a basketball junkie and I'm like, all right, these are great. I've heard of these guys, but I don't have a memory of these guys. Like I know who Bob Pettit is, sorta, but not really. And then there's other names where it's like, I never heard of this guy. He seems funny. When I read your book, I was like, oh my gosh, I know all these guys. And it's also the hilarious stories. And so again, I want to commend you on getting this non-reader to dive in and read your book really quickly.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for even, I don't think it was you saying it was the same or that it was as good or, same genre, but even being mentioned in the same sentences as Terry, who's someone that I actually technically used to work with. I interned at the Plain Dealer.
Oh, cool.
While I was still in college, but just an absolute legend. And he's written more books than I could count, but just an absolute legend, especially out there in Cleveland. Really good guy too. Really nice guy.
Yeah, well, I want to get more into your book. I want to get more into the New York Knicks. But before we do, it's your first time on the show, and we start off each episode actually talking about breakfast. Are you a big breakfast guy, Chris? Have you had breakfast this morning? What's your breakfast routine?
I have. I'm not the most consistent breakfast eater. I really am not the biggest morning person, but it's my favorite meal to eat. So it's kind of one of those things where like when I do have it, it makes me really happy, but I often don't feel like getting up to have one. I'm out of a hotel for the next couple of days. So I stayed awake, or I guess just woke up really, really, really early, like 3-ish to finish a column that I had to write today about the Robert Sarver craziness. So did that. And then once I finished, had a massive headache, probably from not having drank enough water and having not slept enough. Right. But also it's like, well, I'm up now once I finished my column. So I was like, let me run and get something to eat. Ran downstairs and had any sports writer that's traveled a decent amount for work will have a ton of Marriott points and a ton of Marriott stays that they have banked up, so you always have platinum status or whatever they have at your different hotels. So I went down and got the breakfast downstairs, and had, what did I have today? Eggs, potatoes, some like a waffle, and some oatmeal.
So that's legit. That's hearty. You went hard. When you were working on this book, when you or decided to write this book, in the process of doing it, what's maybe one of the favorite things that you uncovered, or that you had like some vague memory of, or something that you didn't know at all, and then you found out the story? You're like, that's kind of amazing.
I mean, there's so much. You could start anywhere. I think I went into the book. What I would say I was proud of, I went into the book knowing that this is, first of all, you don't want Knicks fans, or any NBA fan for that matter, to pick up the book, read it, and feel like, I knew all this already. This was a waste of my time. So you're always trying to provide new context and really completely new information to people that felt like they lived it, to people that, lived and died with it. And in particular for the really big moments where, sure, you can recount the Charles Smith, 4 missed layups at the rim.
Yeah.
But like, give us some information that we don't know about, or that we'd never heard before. And I felt like that's what I was trying to do, is with every big moment, Pat Riley, well, not Pat Riley, but like the Ewing finger roll, the Charles Smith layups, the Starks dunk, the I'm trying to think, all of it, like the Larry Johnson 4-point play. You wanted to have, and John Starks going 2 for 18 in game 7. I wanted to have new details, or completely fresh stuff for all of it, to where you read it and you'd be like, oh my God, I never knew that happened. And that actually explains a whole lot about this. That was probably what I would point to for the book, is I kind of felt like John Starks' 2 for 18 game in game 7 in the finals, getting new information on kind of maybe one of the reasons, not necessarily that Starks wasn't pulled, but that he wasn't at least given a breather, or, if they'd given him a breather, why Rolando Blackman was not going to be the guy to replace him, despite the fact that he was like a logical person to try to throw into the mix. But he and Pat Riley had a really nasty argument a couple of weeks before that.
Yeah, so that gave a lot of color and information to that thing. And again, these are like, so I was a teenager, early teenagers in the 90s. So I kind of remember these things. Like, my impression of John Starks is heavily influenced by that game 7. And I'm like, sure, all right, was he any good? There was no league pass. I didn't have cable even. And I remember him making like the All-Star game, being like, really? That guy? But again, I was just a kid. And so it was really interesting seeing that, just the details of what was going on with John Starks. And it's like, oh, maybe that is a reason. It also maybe caused some self-reflection, because on our show, we have a segment where we identify the worst shooters every week, the International Stackhouse of Pancakes. And so we're always like, this is like the famous 2 for 18, or, so then it's like, wow, all right, these guys go through a lot, like there's other off the court reasons for all these things. As far as giving people stuff they didn't know, I thought the way you highlighted the characters of just like famous people, like Pat Riley, like for me, he's Pat Riley. He's been on TV my whole life, and just finding more and more about him. And I'm just like, this is so entertaining. I'm just eating it up. And then guys like, I thought it was funny where a lot of the anecdotes and stories about Anthony Mason, where like, I didn't know any of them, but also like, it kind of made sense. Like, he gave off that vibe where like, that was a larger than life, just kind of got like, I feel like I didn't know those things, but yeah, none of it seemed too out of character.
Yeah. And it's interesting, because like, you do this process. I've got a friend that just had a book come out Tuesday, and he is kind of loving getting reaction to the book. All of it's been positive, because his book is fantastic. He wrote about a much more serious subject. He wrote about Seth Rich, the DNC staffer that got murdered. And then later, people were kind of creating conspiracy theories about why he was murdered, because he was working for Hillary Clinton, and people tried to tie it to the election. None of that stuff was true, but he wrote a book about that. He's just now getting the reaction of people reading it for the first time, because it came out a week ago. And I'm still in that mode where I love hearing what people think. But I would say one of the criticisms, not many people have had it, but some have, is the idea that they felt like I didn't dig into enough things that would have been totally counterintuitive to the characters in the book, as far as tell me something that would be totally out of character for
Oh,
Ewing
gotcha.
or for Starks and stuff like that. But I feel like to some extent, yeah, maybe there's some of that stuff that you can include, but also some people are kind of, they're just kind of to the script, if that makes sense, where their character is their character, as far as like Starks was unpredictable, but like he lived his whole life that way. And so maybe there are things that he was very predictable about, but you can't like make up something that you don't have. And so I was going off the details I was given, off what people told me. And more often than not, the way that these guys played on the court, there were plenty of things in their backstory to kind of illustrate how they were that way on the court, whether it was Oakley growing up on a farm, basically, or not a farm, but like very much in the country, and being up at 5 a.m. to help his grandfather, take care of the crops and stuff like that. And, that's who he was. That's how he was. And, the idea that he played football to develop more physicality, that's who he was. And with Mason, like you said, the idea that, like that's kind of how I would have suspected he is. So it's not really my deal to make up things that didn't happen, or that, aspects of their personalities that weren't there. It's to try to amplify those things by saying, here's exactly how they got that way. And so I had fun with that. But yeah, I'm glad you feel like the characters were well written and stuff like that.
Well, I mean, if there's a larger than life story that kind of backs up what people have like their impression, you're not going to not use it. Like that seems like, well, it's a great story. And that again adds this, like, that's the guy I saw on television. I didn't know this personal story. And so I thought it was very entertaining. Another thing that the book really amplified that I hadn't given much thought to was how maybe the Knicks specifically in the 90s during their successful run were affected by rules changes. And they felt maybe personally aggrieved that the NBA changed rules specifically that harmed them, or at least affected them the most. And I believe I can't remember who you have from the league office who kind of admits like, yeah, I can see how they felt that way. Because like they were cutting down on the hard fouls, and then they introduced the flagrant foul point system and the technical foul point system. Does that feel like that the Knicks, they would have had maybe more success in the 90s if the league hadn't tweaked these rules to make it not as easy to maybe clutch, grab, and play the style of defense they had been playing?
Maybe. I don't, I tend, it's funny. It's a good question. I don't think that they hurt the team that much as far as long-term. Those things were going to change at some point anyway. And also, I mean, one thing that we really don't mention, but that I do hit on in the book a little bit, is that the Knicks were plenty physical, but it also probably took a toll on them. Where, I think I have a note in one part of the book where 6 of the 12 guys had all had surgery within the same 12 months of each other. And, that Riley had to cut back on all the training camp stuff. So like defensively, it probably made stuff a little bit more difficult for them because they had gotten so used to kind of bludgeoning people. But I don't think they would have been able to use that forever. Certainly when Riley left, I don't think Don Nelson is someone that would have encouraged them to hack the way that they had been. Maybe once Van Gundy comes back. But it's a good question. Like I know people complained about it. They called them the anti-Nick rules. But the truth is, my fear with them is that they would have aged out anyway had they not gone younger. And whatever year that was, 96, I think, when they got Allen Houston and Chris Childs and different players like that. They needed to get younger, and no matter how much the rules changed, I think they were going to have problems if they hadn't gotten younger anyway, because you can only bludgeon teams so much. The Pistons did it, and they started to age out, and then they found themselves not contenders anymore. So I don't think that the Knicks would have lasted much longer, rules, no rules, if they hadn't gone younger.
So I basically have no memory of the Don Nelson year where Don Nelson coached the Knicks. Like I have a basketball card of him on the Knicks, but again, like nothing to take away from it. But one of the things in your book, and I'm not giving away everything in your book, but one of the things in your book is that Don Nelson is like, I got fired because I wanted to trade Patrick Ewing for Shaquille O'Neal. This is something I never heard before. And that the news got back to Patrick Ewing, and that was like the end of his tenure. To me, that reads like a guy saying, "Oh, I wanted to trade for Shaq." Like, how? Not to question your reporting, but how detailed reporting do we have that that's something in the time that Nelson was like, "Yeah, I wanted to do it." Like, that was a story that came out back in whatever it was, the mid '90s.
I don't think it was public in the 90s.
Yeah.
It was something that people confirmed to me that he wanted to do. Now you can
Gotcha.
weigh the idea. The other way to read some of that, which I don't think this was the impetus at the time, but the other way to read it is that, and some people did think this about Nelson, was that after a while, maybe he was aiming to get fired because he was such dislike of the players that he really didn't want to have to deal with them.
Yeah.
He didn't feel like Ewing was receptive to him or vice versa. And so even if it's just, well, I don't want this guy on the team anymore, let's trade him for, why not? Don Nelson had coached Ewing. Had coached Shaq at the World Championships the year before. And so he knew that either through the grapevine or through Shaq himself that he did want out of a smaller market to go to a bigger one, which at that time, obviously, given who the Bulls had, the choices were either going to be New York or LA. And so Don Nelson kind of felt like if we can lock him in via trade before his free agency comes up, we can maybe get a leg up. So I think that was legitimate. Dave Checketts, the team president, told me that was a legitimate thing that he'd asked for, but also that something that he said he shut down pretty quickly, in part because rumors can happen this way of what the coach wants to do and maybe the front office doesn't want to do. So I shut that down very quickly just so that we wouldn't have dissension in the organization. I should also go back too and say that I didn't mean to give short shrift to your question about the rules changes, because there was one rules change that very much impacted the Knicks, particularly when you talk about 1997 when they played the Heat and Patrick Ewing was suspended along with, I think, four other Knicks for coming off the bench during a fight or during, like an altercation between Charlie Ward and PJ Brown. Now, that was something that had changed really, again, kind of because of the Knicks with their fight against the Phoenix Suns in '93, where Greg Anthony sucker punches Kevin Johnson. But that had a huge, huge impact. Again, do I think the Knicks would have won the championship that year? We're talking about a year in which the Bulls, I think, won. Was that their 72-win season? I can't remember. But they would have still had to go through the Bulls. They would have had to win another round, and they would have had to win the finals as well. I'm not sure that all would have happened, but I will say the Knicks talk about that year a lot and saying that they feel like that was maybe one of the best chances they had to win a title. They had gone toe-to-toe with the Bulls in the regular season and split the series that year. They had just gone younger with Larry Johnson, Allen Houston, Chris Childs. So maybe there would have been a chance. I'm not sure, but that rule did come back to bite them in a huge way. They'd been up 3-1 in a series and then obviously lost the series in 7 games.
So I'm glad you mentioned that, because a couple things. One of the joys of reading your book versus maybe like an older basketball book is what I didn't remember this 1993 Doc Rivers fight against the Suns, but like it's on YouTube. Like I'm reading your book and then I go to YouTube, I can watch it, and then I can see like Linda Cohn on ESPN talking about like there's maybe rules changes are coming. These guys got suspended, but then go to that 97 series where I think it's fair to say, maybe Heat fans and will argue, it's fair to say that fight and suspensions cost them the series, because they're up 3-2. They lose the last 2 games without these guys. It's one of those like moments in NBA history where I think suspensions directly cost a team a playoff series. Like maybe not the title, you still got to beat Michael Jordan, but like it definitely cost him a playoff series. And I'm trying to think like, when we write NBA history and when we talk about basketball, sometimes it's like this is the champion, and thus we'll now frame our story around this champion. And a lot of times, at least for me, I don't give like maybe the full acceptance of like that team maybe wasn't going to win the title. Like maybe the Bucks weren't going to win the title 2 years ago if Drew Holiday doesn't make that steal and that alley-oop. And then there's weird ones where it's like, well, maybe Jordan wouldn't have won these titles or something. And thinking about suspensions that cost team series, like that's a huge one. That next one's huge. There's obviously like the Draymond Green suspension in the finals that he has the Knicks to thank because of the points accumulation of flagrant fouls. I
was trying to figure out how they connected to that before you said
that. If Oakley hadn't been fouling everybody so hard, maybe there wouldn't have been that point system set up. And then, of course, this is not in the national consciousness. I go to my Memphis Grizzlies, where no one ever talks about it. I think the most talented roster the Grizzlies ever had. They took a full strength, peak of their powers Thunder team. They had a game 7 against them. Thunder were 2 seed, Grizzlies were 7 seed, and Zebo got suspended in somewhat surprising fashion. This is one like where a couple days after the elbow. By the way, Steven Adams involved in both the Draymond Green suspension and the I
can hear the conspiracy music.
I'm just saying, I'm glad Steven Adams is on the Grizzlies now. Wonderful addition. But he had his hand in both these things. And then there's the Grizzlies lose in game 7 to a very good Thunder team with maybe their most talented squad of the grit and grind era. And like, is that the full list? Are there others back there in the suspension?
No, of course.
Either a series or a title. I mean, the Suns. Did I mention the Suns?
The Suns are the first one that come to mind, and it's funny to think that the Suns and the Knicks have both been impacted by that, given that they were the teams that were involved. Yeah. The other one that I think really put it over the top as far as just the series that influenced some of these rules changes, where the Knicks and the Bulls had a really big fight between Derek Harper and JoJo English. That in particular, that one, it happened right in front of David Stern, who was at the game with his wife, and it happened courtside. So you had, wealthy people sitting right there as players were falling onto their laps, as John Starks is jawing at the daughters of one of the team's minority owners, the Bulls minority owners. The next game that they had in Chicago, some of the fans were wearing helmets to kind of talk about how physical it was and how the players were falling into the crowd. David Stern did not want that image. And I think that one, as much as the Greg Anthony, Kevin Johnson thing, Doc Rivers thing, really influenced stuff because of the fact that the league just was not going to stand for the perception. I mean, the league was battling a lot of things. It's still, as far as who watches the sport, it's still is a primarily white sport as far as the audience. Back then, even more so, you're trying to appeal to a certain type of fan, and you're not trying to have people run around, hitting each other, falling into the crowd. Potentially, we saw Mouse at the Palace. Like, the league didn't want that to happen, and obviously it worked its way up to that over time. But David Stern was worried about losing a particular sort of fan, so he scaled everything down, which did take a toll on the Knicks. I think it was eventual, but it absolutely did take a toll on the Knicks. And you could kind of see it coming, and I wrote about that in the book and kind of foreshadowed some of that in the book, that even the Knicks coaches had been worried about it to some extent, that the team would just kind of boil and boil and boil and kind of bubble over at some point in a meaningful moment. And we did see that happen against the Heat in 97.
Right. Final thing. The Knicks have not had a lot of success since the 90s ended.
They have not.
It's been a bit of a rough spell. Let's fast forward to present day. What are your thoughts on the Knicks and their offseason and their failed pursuit of Donovan Mitchell? Like, do you think they should have done more? There are reports out there that maybe they offered a pretty competitive trade package. We don't know if that's true necessarily, but do you think they should have done more this offseason? And was it the right move maybe to walk away from that negotiating table?
I'll tell you. I mean, I think if they offered as much as what some of the reports had with RJ Barrett and Mitchell Robinson and, picks, and I can't even remember who else was offered at one point. And then after a while, it was like, is it going to be 3 or 4 picks and unprotected, and how many of them? And, the guys we kept hearing about were Obi Toppin and Quentin Grimes and, whatever it was going to be at a certain point. My thing was always going to be this. And I actually wrote a story the day of the trade, right before the Mitchell trade happened, kind of saying I didn't really know what the Knicks were going to look like if they did get Donovan Mitchell to play alongside Jalen Brunson, RJ Barrett, Julius Randle. Like, I just don't think that would have been that great a team, which is a lot. And, that was kind of the criticism of the Carmelo trade to some extent, is that you gave up a lot for him and gave up a lot on your roster to get him, or a lot of your future, as it would have been in this case with all the picks they would have given up. I don't think anybody would think that the Knicks would be anything better than like a 6 seed at best. And, even with Cleveland, even as good as Cleveland looks on paper with 4 really, really, really good young players, I'm not sure they're going to finish above like 5th or 6th in the East. And I think they have a better roster right now than the Knicks do. So you could have made the deal. I think there's enough youth in Mitchell and RJ Barrett to where maybe a year or two from now they could have done more. But I just don't think that they would have been particularly that impressive. I would have had questions about the lack of size in their backcourt if they had Donovan Mitchell at 6'1" and Jalen Brunson at 6'1" trying to defend people. So look, it's embarrassing for them. It is a little bit strange to have gotten that far down the road. I can't remember the last team that was offering to trade its best young player in a deal and then instead give him an extension for money that's significant and then just say, oh, never mind. Like, I've never seen that. It's bizarre. I can't remember too many things like it, but I don't think it's that bad of a thing for them. I would personally probably rather have the bevy of assets that they have to maybe go after the next star. We'll have to see who it is, but I don't think Donovan Mitchell is that big of a difference maker at the top level of the conference. And I think a lot of Knicks fans will probably come to realize that too. But we'll see. Cleveland could be a good fit for him. I have some questions about that fit, but he is a very, very good player and the type of scorer the Knicks have not had in a long time.
At the very least, the lack of acquiring Donovan Mitchell is like this nice kind of unformed lump of clay or impressionistic painting for sports talk people, where we can be like, oh, same old Knicks. They didn't get it done. Or you can look at it and say, oh, they did a good job of not going all in, because that would have been same old Knicks. It would have been Carmelo repeating itself. So it gives us a couple different avenues to argue.
And trust me, if you pay any attention to that fan base, you've got people that are happy because a lot of them did not want the trade, but also frustrated because they're like, see, the media was going to kill us one way or the other. If we went all in, they were going to kill us. Now that we didn't get them, they're going to kill us. And it's just kind of choose your own adventure sort of thing.
I'm glad.
And I do think there probably is some of that, but I don't know that it would have fundamentally changed that much about what they would have done this season or the next couple of years anyway. I'm just more kind of weirded out that Utah didn't take anything that the Knicks were offering, given that look at who Cleveland has on that roster. If we're talking about draft picks alone, I would much rather have the Knicks draft picks than Cleveland's, given that they've got Garland and Evan Mobley and Jared Allen, and now they've got Mitchell. So it was just kind of strange. I wasn't that impressed with the package that Cleveland gave up to get them.
Yeah. Well, Chris, thanks so much for coming on. Really enjoyed talking about your book with you, and hopefully you'll come back on again sometime.
I'd be happy to, man. Thank you so much for having me and for enjoying the book. I appreciate you.